All right, welcome into the show. This is Philadelphia Eagles Now by Chat Sports. I'm Chase Sr., and coming your way on the show, perfect offseason plan. How the Philadelphia Eagles can get back to being Super Bowl contenders after a disastrous ending to the 2023 season. Before we get started, we're going to continue to give you the best coverage right here on YouTube. And anytime the Eagles make a move, if Nick Sirianni gets fired, when they make a signing or a roster move, we talk about it right here on the show. Draft profiles, free agent targets, we do it all. So make sure you like us and subscribe. Hit that bell icon. Turn on those notifications because whenever we go live, whenever we push out a video, you will be notified. So about a 5-step plan for how the Eagles can perfect the next couple of months and get this team back on track going into the 2024 season. And I think the most pertinent issue that Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman have to figure out is the head coaching spot. If Nick Sirianni does return for his 4th season as the Eagles head coach, there are a couple of things that he needs to do to buy the locker room back. He needs to hire a new offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. He needs to make big adjustments to his offense, which was vanilla, which was mundane, not explosive, and predictable. I think that he has to overhaul his defensive philosophy as a head coach because I didn't like Jonathan Gannon's defensive style where they weren't aggressive enough, and we know this year was just awful with Sean Desai and Matt Patricia. So get a new defensive coordinator in here who has fresh ideas and a new offensive coordinator who's creative and brings about fresh ideas as well. Nick Sirianni has to look in the mirror. He has to make some necessary changes as a football mind, as a head coach, and he has to admit to some of his faults and his weaknesses. And in doing so, instill confidence back in the team. And he also has to mend the relationship with Jalen Hurts, which at moments throughout his tenure has been really good, but this year it fell apart a little bit. And Hurts, after the playoff loss to the Buccaneers, did not necessarily give Nick Sirianni a ringing endorsement. He was asked, do you want Nick Sirianni back? He said, I didn't know that he was going anywhere. Do you have confidence in him as your head coach? He said, I have confidence in everybody in this building. He did not go to bat with Nick Sirianni. And according to Tim McManus, ESPN, Hurts' vision for the offense did not meet the vision of Nick Sirianni or Brian Johnson either. So if Sirianni comes back, he has to make these necessary changes. And if he does return, here's my guide for how Sirianni has to fix the offense. I want to see more pre-snap motion. The Eagles were 32nd among 32 teams in pre-snap motion this year. That just doesn't align with the modern-day creativity that we see from some of the best offensive minds in football. Nick Sirianni has to run the football more behind this Eagles offensive line. I don't care what looks the Buccaneers gave Philadelphia on Monday night. It was play calling and game malpractice for them to not give the football to DeAndre Swift and to not establish the run against a team who in week 3, the Eagles ran it 40 times for 201 yards. Eagles have to be less reliant on the deep ball. They have to target the middle area of the field because Jalen Hurts was 30th among all qualifying quarterbacks at targeting the middle area of the field, which doesn't make any sense at all. And please, Nick Sirianni, can you have an answer for the blitz? I kept crying for it. Eagles fans everywhere were begging and pleading for you to have a safety valve, to have a hot route, to have your wide receivers looking back at Jalen Hurts when teams were sending the house, and you failed to continue to do that. Now, if Nick Sirianni is fired, here are my 6 replacements that I would interview to replace Sirianni. Jim Harbaugh is my number 1 candidate. Michigan head coach, has a couple of interviews with some NFL teams so far this offseason. Los Angeles Chargers, Atlanta Falcons, others said to be interested, just won a national championship with the Wolverines, and everywhere that he's gone, he's won big, and his offensive scheme is a pro-level scheme. So too is his defensive scheme. He maximizes his coaches, he maximizes his players, big brand name for a big brand organization. I'd give him a blank check, and he could also bring Jesse Minter, the Michigan defensive coordinator, with him. Candidate number 2 would be Bobby Slowick, who came up under head coach Kyle Shanahan, has experience working on the defensive side of the ball under Mike Shanahan and is the current Texans offensive coordinator. That offense is electric, and C.J. Stroud has had a fantastic rookie season, leading the NFL, all quarterbacks in touchdown to interception ratio. Ben Johnson, another creative offensive mind, the Lions offensive coordinator, who has elevated Jared Goff and has the Lions offense humming right now. If you want a culture changer, you want to go defense, to another coach who also maximizes his players and his roster and has his teams consistently punching above their weight. That's Mike Vrabel, who would fit the identity of this city to a T, and I'm curious to see what he'd be able to do with a talented roster and a better quarterback situation than what he had with the Titans. Mike Macdonald is the Ravens defensive coordinator. Baltimore, the #1 defense in the National Football League. He's an up-and-coming defensive guru. And Bill Belichick would be my last option here, but I do think he's one of the top candidates available. Perfect offseason step number 2. We're going to focus solely on offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator as if Nick Sirianni were to come back. My #1 offensive coordinator candidate and my dream OC of choice would be G.J. Kinney, Texas State head coach, former Eagles practice squad quarterback who didn't have a long run in the NFL, but is off to a very impressive start as a head coach in college football. Currently at Texas State, as I mentioned, and here are the numbers offensively before his arrival and after his arrival. In 2022, Texas State averaged 21 points per game and 325 yards of offense per matchup. After G.J. Kinney, in his first year, 36 points per game, 457 yards per outing. G.J. Kinney before Texas State at Incarnate Ward. In 2021, before him, 39 points per game, 513 yards per game, and then after G.J. Kinney, his final season there, 51 points per game, 721 yards per game. A creative offensive mind who is malleable with his offensive approach, and I think that he could bring some creative and refreshing concepts to this Eagles offense, get Jalen Hurts back in line, back to playing like he did in 2022. That's my dream OC. My dream defensive coordinator is a guy who I've talked about a couple of times here on the show. He is a part of the Harbaugh tree and worked under Mike Macdonald. Jesse Minter, current Michigan defensive coordinator who does have NFL experience as a DB's coach for the Baltimore Ravens. Ever since I can remember watching football, the Baltimore Ravens have had a defensive style that I absolutely love. And when I was in Houston covering the national championship, spent some time with Jesse Minter. And I was very impressed with his vision of defense and how he looks at the game of football. And at Michigan this past year, the Wolverines were awesome. And when I watched the national championship up close and personal, and when I watched Michigan this year, they obviously run that pro style of defense that the Ravens have, and it's really the hottest defense in football right now. Michigan able to get pressure with 4, but they also have a great back end. A lot of pro players who Minter and Macdonald have been able to groom and develop. Michigan had a stop rate of 81.6%. They allowed just 10.4 points per game, #1 in the NFL. The Wolverines did not give up 25 points all year, #1 total defense, and then Michigan #2 in pass defense, 3 and outs, takeaways, and they gave up the second fewest 20-yard plays. Those numbers and the defensive scheme so much better than what we've seen from Jonathan Gannon, Sean Desai, as well as Matt Patricia. This is one of the new up-and-coming defensive minds who I think could continue to take the NFL by storm, just like Mike Macdonald, who's already landing head coaching interviews across the NFL. With that, I ask you this, because a lot of this show is based on the future of Nick Sirianni. Does Sirianni deserve another year? Y for yes, N for no. Let us know. And keep in mind, if you're watching this, we are recording this on Tuesday, January 16th. Today's Eagles Now is sponsored by Factor Meals. Get 50% off when you use the code EaglesChat50. That's the code EaglesChat50 for 50% off. And here in 2024, get off to a good start with your health and wellness. Not only does Factor offer fast, simple solutions when I'm too busy to cook, they also help me keep on top of my fitness goals. With offerings like Protein Plus and Keto, I can stay on track. This is definitely going to come in handy for my New Year goals, and Factor has everything I need for flavorful, nutritious meals. In addition to ready-to-eat meals, they have cold-pressed juices, smoothies, energy bites, extra protein, veggie sides, and more to keep me energized during frantic times. So one more time, factormeals.com/EaglesChat50. You pick your pre-made meals. They are prepped and cooked to perfection. Heat them up and enjoy them. Dietitian approved and chef crafted meals delivered straight to your door with no prep needed. Number 3. This is on Howie Roseman here. And this is on this Eagles front office. Philadelphia has to address linebacker, they have to address cornerback, and they have to address safety. Those were the weaknesses on this defense that time and time again continue to get exposed. Now, with the better defensive coordinator and a better defensive scheme who can elevate members of this defense, they can do a better job of putting players in positions to succeed, unlike Sean Desai, definitely unlike Matt Patricia. But if you get a lot of talent and a new defensive scheme, I think we'll finally, hopefully, and I'm very hopeful, see a great defense for this organization for the first time in a really long time. My dream offseason targets on the defensive side of the football. Howie Roseman finally has to invest in linebacker. Patrick Queen is going to be available. He's never missed a game in his NFL career. Great tackler and a great off-ball linebacker. Him on that Ravens defense, I should say, he's just been a perfect fit, and that level of physicality is something that the Eagles need on this defense. I don't want to see any more of Nicholas Morrow getting burnt to a crisp. I don't want to see Zach Cunningham any longer on this team. Nakobe Dean, injured too much. Patrick Queen, you're my guy. And not only am I trying to sign Patrick Queen, who's still in his mid-20s, I want a fearful linebacking duo for the next 5 to 10 years. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. can help give you that. He was awesome at Clemson throughout his career under Dabo Swinney, and we know was Pops, number 54, the Axeman, a great Eagle for a long time. That's a player that you can groom and develop to be a part of this organization and a pillar of this defense for the foreseeable future. Jalen Johnson was one of the top cornerbacks in the National Football League this year. Great ball skills, great instincts, really good athlete, lockdown corner on the outside. Please just cut bait with James Bradbury. Do whatever you have to do. I still think Darius Slay can play, so you have big play Slay and either Jalen Johnson or L'Jarius Sneed on the outside, because Sneed has really improved his value going into the free agency period. He's been tremendous for that Chiefs defense. And yes, I'm down to bring back C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I know it didn't end well, but the Eagles need some swagger. And the Eagles need a dog on that defense. And he's a player who can dissect plays before they happen, make a read on the football, and pick passes off. And the Eagles were one of the worst teams in the NFL this year at turnover ratio and forcing turnovers. CD Deuce could come back, and he could give this Eagles team a boost. I'm trying to mend the fences. I'm trying to get him on the right note with Howie Roseman. You give him a bag, and money talks. As for the top cornerbacks in the 2024 NFL Draft, if you want to take one of these players at number 22, Cooper DeJean, or in Philadelphia, he'll be called Cooper DeJean. Yes, a white corner, arguably the number 1 corner in this draft class. Nate Wiggins out of Clemson is a player. Producer Chip went to Clemson. He might be biased, but he thinks that Wiggins is the top corner in this draft. Terrion Arnold of Alabama, Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama, also really good players. And then you have Ennis Rakestraw Jr. out of Mizzou. Now, Howie Roseman, I think, is to blame and should be blamed for some of the Eagles' failures on defense. And yeah, Philadelphia lost 2 starting linebackers in TJ Edwards and Kaiser White. And you lost both of your starting safeties in CJ Gardner-Johnson and Marcus Epps. You lost 11 sacks with Javon Hargrave. But his failure and him neglecting linebacker and safety really cost this team this year. It was too little too late in trading for Kevin Byard, who I think his best days are behind him. I also think the Eagles this offseason need to address wide receiver 3, because in the wild card round, A.J. Brown goes down, Julio Jones then gets hurt, and Britton Covey is getting snaps in a playoff game. Really good returner is Covey. He's not an NFL wide receiver. And I think drafting a wide receiver might make more sense because you're already paying big-time dollars to A.J. Brown and you're paying a lot of money to Devontae Smith. So drafting a wide receiver gives you a cost-controlled asset for the next 4 to 5 years and a player who could have an impact on this offense and help make Jalen Hurts' life a little bit easier. There are a couple of wide receivers who could fall to the Eagles at 22 or be available in the second round. Brian Thomas out of LSU, very good vertical threat. Troy Franklin is certainly shifty. Ladd McConkey, more of a slower slot, who I would kind of compare to a Hunter Renfrow type of receiver or maybe a Julian Edelman. Devontae Walker reminds me of Mike Wallace from back in the day. Slim build, but can take the top off of the defense. If you want a wide receiver who can go up and get it, Pro Football Focus has Keon Coleman as a second or third round pick. He looked like a first round pick to me. Separation is going to be an issue, but a jump ball wide receiver who can go up and get those 50-50 balls, and I imagine he can win from the slot. And then Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. At times, I thought he was Texas's best wide receiver this year with Quinn Ewers throwing him the football. Really came on late in the 2023 season. As for the top wide receiver free agent targets, you're looking at this crew right here. T. Higgins is going to get a bag. He's out of the Eagles' price range. I think the same can be said for Michael Pittman as well as Mike Evans. Marquise Hollywood Brown is a player that I wouldn't hate operating out of the slot, but culturally, I've heard that it's a disaster with him. And in Baltimore and with Arizona, he's kind of worn out his welcome. And Jalen Hurts at Alabama did play with Calvin Ridley. The Eagles did check in on Calvin Ridley prior to his betting suspension. Played with Doug Peterson and the Jags this year, was pretty solid. Wouldn't mind bringing him to Philadelphia either. Lastly, at number 5, I think it's time to reset the clock on the running back position. DeAndre Swift had a really, really good year, but I think you draft a young running back who is going to be a cost-controlled asset as well for the next 4 to 5 years, most likely 4 years because he's not going to be a first-round pick, and you don't have that fifth-year option ability. And this isn't a great running back draft class here. Jonathan Brooks out of Texas might be RB1 in the 2024 draft. Trey Benson out of Florida State, not a bad player. Culturally, Blake Corum is a team leader, the backbone of that Michigan team. He has excellent vision. He's shorter and compact and is balanced after taking hits. I think he's going to be able to play and be a productive player in this league for a little while at running back. I'm not sure he's a number 1, but I'd like to see him on this team too. He can catch the ball out of the backfield a little bit. Had an opportunity to interview him at the College Football Playoff Natty, and I was very impressed with how he carried himself. And then Bucky Irving and Audric Estime, the latter two running backs in the top 5 of this draft class. What's funny is that this free agency class at the running back position is actually pretty loaded with some really, really notable names. Saquon Barkley, massive injury risks. Josh Jacobs, after leading the NFL in rushing 2 years ago, wasn't the same player. I think that was partially due to the fact that he wasn't with the Raiders all throughout training camp and in the preseason. Derrick Henry still looked pretty damn good this year. He's a physical load, but do you trust him with the mileage on his tires to hold up as he gets older? I wouldn't be opposed to bringing back DeAndre Swift, who ran for more than 1,000 yards for the first time in his career this year. And then Austin Eckler, a dual threat back, but you have injury concerns about him as well as he gets a little bit older. And anytime you're paying a running back solid money, who they're on that second or third contract, there are big risks right there. Lastly, the Eagles do have to figure out their own free agents, right? And it's not like they have a lot of marquee ones. They more so have to figure out what to do with a couple of Eagles legends, and Fletcher Cox as well as Brandon Graham. BG said after that Buccaneers loss that he wants to come back for a farewell season. Fletcher Cox said today, as we record this on Tuesday, that he hasn't thought about his future, but proved this year that he could play at a high level. And then you have DeAndre Swift, maybe the best player on the Eagles free agency crop. Marcus Mariota, I put him on here because you have to figure out backup quarterback. And then Zach Cunningham on that list as well. So it's not like if you lose any of these players, they're massive, massive losses like the Eagles had to suffer last year after the Super Bowl. But the top Eagles free agents right there as we inform you and do our due diligence. What is your perfect Eagles offseason plan? And you can give me one step. You can give me multiple steps. You can write a sentence or a paragraph. We always love your feedback right here on the show.